So, namaskar friends and welcome once again. As I promised in the last class, we are still continuing with Jasmine by Bharati Mukherjee. And as we have seen, this is one of the most prominent diasporic texts of its time and is different in the sense Bharati Mukherjee is not talking about creating a third space or living in liminal space. Rather, she is talking about a need for us to, create our identity and identify ourselves with the new locale or new country or the host country. When we look at Jasmine as a diasporic text, uh, we can find lot of diasporic material in this novel because the novelist talks about an Indian lady who travels from her remote village to the nearest city and then to America and to further deep in America, and that way she is a migrant and she has decided on her own to go to America. So she is not forced, but she is going there voluntarily. And so she is ready to pay whatever prices she has to pay in order to survive and make meaning out of her life. So, identity and transformation, immigration, cultural conflict and assimilation, displacement, hybridity and transculturalism, quest for self independence. These are some of the prominent themes that we find in the novel. So, if we look at some of the quotes from the novel, they really help us understand this. I suppressed my shock, my disgust. This country has so many ways of humiliating, of disappointing. So Jasmine has her own share of good and bad experiences, and comes across many such instances, many such experiences which may be forcing her to go back to her country, but then she is a fighter, an adapter, and she takes all this in her stride and continues to live. She is insulted by a taxi driver in the New York. She is insulted by the beggar in New York who calls her a foreign bitch when she is not able to give him any single penny. And so, in subtle ways, she comes across such experiences, and she finds that the Americans, many of them don't really know about people like her, like Mr. Scola, the school teacher of Du, her adopted son, believing that Du is a Vietnamese. He knows little bit of Vietnamese, and so he uses that on him, and the boy freezes. And this gives us an idea how these American people are uh, lacking in sensitivity, because that boy had a very bloody kind of experience, a very traumatic experience, and that's why when she hears him talking in his language, he just freezes because he doesn't want to remember anything from his traumatic past. And again, more than once we find that how identity transformation takes place and what prices one has to pay, because there is no easy going for these people. They really have to struggle in order to transform themselves or carve an identity for themselves. As these lines also say, there are no harmless compassionate ways to remake oneself. We murder who we were, so we can rebirth ourselves in the images of dreams. And probably this is also part of philosophy of the author, who believes that unless and until murder our previous self, we will not be refashioning ourselves or will not experience any kind of rebirth. So, uh, Jyoti has to die if Jasmine has to be born, and then the Jasmine has to die in order to give way to Jace, Jazzy, and Jane. But yes, it's not possible all the time. You will find that everything happens to the same person, and quintessentially, we find that we are made of all these kits and uh, bits that constitute our life. So maybe Jasmine might have transformed, but all these events that happened to her in her life form part of herself. So while making a difference between her attitude and her father, who is a Lahori Lala, and the family was uprooted at the time of partition, and they had left behind a cozy, successful life in Lahore. Uh, Her father could never come to terms with this transformation, and remained throughout his life, bunkered himself in his earlier self, governed by nostalgia. So he would always, believe that life for him is Lahore, and the moment he was forced to leave Lahore, there is a disconnect with his life, and what he is leading now is just carrying his corpse on his own shoulders, nothing else. So whenever he refers to something, all the time he talks about Lahore as if his life has frozen in Lahore. So Lahori Lalas, Lahori advocates, Lahori cuisine, Lahori culture, Lahori language. He is so full of Lahore that even if he has been living in this part of the country in India, he never quite comes out of this, and ultimately he dissociates himself with reality and ultimately dies a violent death. This is also symbolic that, for survival, you have to fight, not to give up. And so Jasmine, does not approve of this expatriate sensibility of her father, and makes a comparison between herself and her father. Fact is, there was a difference. My father was right to notice it and to let it set a standard, but that picture is broken. It is the same here, this side as that. He will never see Lahore again. I never have. Only a fool would let it rule his life. So it's very clear in the mind of Jasmine that only a fool will live in such a bunker of artificially maintained Indianness or whatever, and this does not really help uh, somebody if someone wants to realize one's dream. Again, Jasmine is there to pay any price for that, and that's why, when she is raped by her face, first thought that comes to her mind is that of surrendering herself, committing suicide, but then her desire to leave, you know dominates her desire to die, and ultimately, she musters courage and kills the monster in the brutal fashion. Again, this is not only the murder of half face, this is also the murder of Jasmine's earlier self, that uh, helpless widow, 17-year helpless widow of uh, an Indian man. She murders that helpless widow at that point in time, and one who walks out, although looks unsteady, thirsty, and hungry, does not know where to go. One who walks out is a different woman altogether. She observes no one to call to, no one to disturb us, just me and the man who had raped me, the man I had murdered. The room looked like a slaughterhouse. Blood had congealed on my hands, my chin, my breasts. What a monstrous thing! What an infinitesimal thing is the taking of a human life. For the second time in 3 months, I was in a room with a slain man, my body bloodied. I was walking death, death incarnate. So, this is how she is reborn and her identity is transformed. Um, Again, she observes Jyoti of Hasnapur was not Jasmine. In each of her avatars, she is different. She realizes that Jyoti of Hasnapur was not Jasmine. Duff's Day Mummy and Taylor and Oiley's affair in Manhattan, that Jasmine is not this Jane Ripplemere having lunch with Mary Weber, the Mary Webb at the University Club today, and which of us is the undetected murderer of a half faced monster? Which of us has held a dying husband? Which of us was raped and raped and raped in boats and cars and motel rooms? So she finds layers in her own identity, and she does not really determine which one of her former selves is part of the current self. And it seems to her that at each step in her life, she has carved a new identity, she has transformed. Well, she had a low tolerance for reminiscence and bitterness or nostalgia. Let the past make you worry by all means, but do not let it deform you. This is the piece of advice she gets from Lillian Gordon, that kind Quaker lady who saves her after her rape by Hafiz and escape from that remote deserted motel in Florida. Um, that lady does not promote any kind of backward looking attitude or approach, and does not approve of nostalgia. She always says that let the past make you vary by all means, but do not let it deform you. Learn from your past, of course, but then learn how to overcome all your hurdles rather than surrendering yourself to them. And again, she is the one who gives her vital lessons in Americanness, and that really helps her later on, that she is not detected, although she is known to be different, but then uh, she is not detected as an illegal immigrant to America. Um, as she advises her, Lillian Gordon, she says, now remember, if you walk and talk American, they will think you were born here. Most Americans can't imagine anything else. This also talks about the American multicultural pluralistic society, where you have people from different parts of the world, and they have been accepted as uh, Americans. And that is why if you talk like them, you walk like them, you become one with them. That's what Lillian Gordon suggests to Jasmine. Jasmine also comes across many survivors like her. There are people who have been struggling in their life, have not been fortunate enough to really earn their life the way they should have desired. Well, friends, many a time we always think of America as an El Dorado, where we can go and mine and bring out diamond back home. But then we forget that we are just looking at the success stories, we are not looking at the stories of failure. There are hundreds and thousands of people who have gone there and have survived simply, although they have not made it big in their life as they initially desired. So while traveling in New York, she comes to know from the taxi driver that he was a doctor from Kabul. As he says, in Kabul, I was a doctor. We have to be here living like dogs because they have taken everything from us. So Afghanistan is a trouble torn country, and these people are living like refugees in US, and obviously they don't have uh, that kind of luxury and protection in their life as is believed by all who are migrating to US. But still he also survives, and this again gives some kind of strength to Jasmine, that if he can survive, I can survive too. And again, in New York, she finds that there are a lot of people, on the streets. I saw only more greed, more people like myself. New York was an archipelago of ghettos seething with aliens. Well, I could not admit that I had accustomed myself to American clothes. American clothes disguised my widowhood. This is an episode when she is living with the benefactor and mentor of her husband, uh, Mr. Devinder Badhera, his physics teacher who saved his meager tutor salary to support him, because Prakash was an orphan bright child, and it was Devinder Badhera who had encouraged him to apply to US, and so he played a big part in the life of Prakash. And so Jasmine thought that it would be ingracious on her part if she does not uh, go to meet Devinder Badhera. When she meets Devinder Badhera, they are living in Flushing Meadows, and there she is allowed to live with them as a widow of his favorite former student, and she lives there. But amidst all that luxury, she is expected to maintain the decency and modesty of an Indian widow, which is too much for her, because she finds this life quite restricting and regressive at the same time. It is what she has left behind in India, and if she continues to live the way she should have continued in India, there is no point for her to go to America. So there are times when she secretly dresses herself uh, in American clothes, and at that point in time she realizes her true self, her self that she desires to refashion for herself. I could not admit that I had accustomed myself to American clothes. American clothes disguised my widowhood. In a t shirt and cords, I was taken for a student. In this apartment of artificially maintained Indianness, I wanted to distance myself from everything Indian, everything Jyoti like. To them, I was a widow who should show proper modesty of appearance and attitude. And that is the reason, she flew from there, although she had lot of protection there. So Bharati Mukherjee seems to be suggesting that living in ghetto of artificially maintained Indianness would certainly not help the diasporic community, because they will fail to see the budding America promise if they continue to do like that. This was the tenor of all the old people's complaints. We have followed our children to America, and look what happens to us. Our sons are selfish. Our daughters want to work and stay thin all the time. This rush. What to do? There are no grandchildren for us to play with. You know, the same old Indian tradition where the parents want their children to get married, to have children, so that they can perpetuate their family and they can also have somebody to play with. In these lines, the pains of the parents of Devinder Badhera have been expressed, because they are living in that artificially maintained ghetto all alone, and for them it's so difficult living out of their country. So again, they are part of the same diasporic expatriate ghetto. And so she believes that had they mixed with the rest of the people there, probably their life would have been much more fulfilling rather than confining themselves to this ghetto. And again, she has experiences how the American society is very demanding, and how it is always in motion, forward looking, and there are quick transformations, and one needs to adapt to them in order to survive. I quote, "In America, nothing lasts. I can say that now, and it does not shock me. But I think it was the hardest lesson of all for me to learn. We arrive so eager to learn, to adjust, to participate, only to find the monuments are plastic, agreements are annulled, nothing is forever, nothing is so terrible or so wonderful that it won't disintegrate." So she learns how the American identity is fluid, and it brings her out of the complacency of the stable life in India. She finds that if you feel that you are in your groove and it is forever, like the government jobs in India, obviously you will not be doing justice to yourself. You need to blow with the current in order to survive in America. Taylor did not want to change me. He did not want to score or and sanitize the foreignness. My being different from oily or Kate did not scare him. I changed because I wanted to bunker oneself inside nostalgia, to see the heart in bulletproof vest was to be a coward. So, time and again, she gives us a hint and also shares the peace of the mind of her author that, if one has to survive in America, one has to think like American, dress like American, and live like American. So there is not then there is nothing I can do. Time will tell if I am a tornado, rubble maker, arising from nowhere and disappearing into a cloud. I am out the door and in the potholed and rutted driveway, scrambling ahead of Taylor, greedy with wants and reckless from hope. These concluding lines of the novel tell us about the unfinished job of Jasmine of refashioning herself, and she is not turning judgmental, but again she is ready to continue her enterprising journey in America, and this is what Bharati Mukherjee believes is the right way forward. And so we find that this particular novel of Bharati Mukherjee, is a novel of diasporic identity. We find identity and transformation in the case of uh, Jyoti. Jyoti is the village girl who turns a city girl when she becomes Jasmine, and from there she assumes new identities, and all these new identities add something to her character. And Mukherjee also talks about gender and agency through Jasmine. She is not a subservient, surrendering girl who sacrifices herself for anybody else. Rather, she loves to live life on her own terms. And that is the reason, right in the beginning, when prophecy is there by astrologer of her widowhood and exile, she is out there to challenge it, and she challenges it. Although we find that it turns out to be almost the same, uh, as she becomes a widow at the age of 17, and then when she decides to live with Bud Ripplemeyer. Bud Ripplemeyer is a 50-year-old fit and healthy man, but before she thinks of marrying him, he is also almost dead. So at times he also says that I saved his life by not marrying him because it is my fate to be a widow and in exile. But then this exile, you know, it turns out to be as the uh, old fakir had prophesied, but she does not believe that this is something that is debilitating. And that is why, towards the end, her final move and decision to settle with Taylor makes us feel that, finally she leaves behind her widowhood or that fear of widowhood and exile, in that, unlike an exile who is always pumping and parodying his or her nostalgia for a lost home in a lost country, always talking in terms of things left behind or loss and trauma, she continues to excel in her life and look forward, looking at newer pastures, new opportunities, and refashioning herself, taking pride in whatever she has achieved in her life. So, this is also a story of gender and agency. And again, another very prominent theme we can talk about is violence and rebirth. Uh, Jasmine's life is marked by violence, and we find that early on, her father is gored by a bull to death in a very traumatic, violent fashion. And then, after, her husband, is killed in a bomb blast. These two incidents are very violent, and they change the course of her life. And again, when she enters America, again it calls for the ultimate sacrifice on her part, the sacrifice of her chastity, and she is violently raped by half face. Again, she survives that as well. And there is another violence in her life when, Bud Ripplemeyer is shot at by a defaulter, a Harlan Kroner of his banks. So each of these violent episodes in the life of Jasmine leave her in some kind of situation where either she has to surrender herself and accept life as it is, or she has to fight courageously against that and refashion her life. And we find that such is Jasmine. She is so courageous that, she chooses to be enterprising and fighting and does not really surrender. I would also like to talk about the narrative structure of this novel a little bit. We find that the novel is non-linear, as time and again we have seen the diasporic texts are mostly non-linear because they are based on memory. And so in this novel as well, we find that it's a non-linear narrative in which the narrator, uh, the chief protagonist Jasmine, goes back and forth in time and mixes her memory and desire, her past and present, her life in India and US, and comes out with a very fascinating first person narrative. And we find that the prose in this novel is lyrical and vivid. We have seen that Bharati Mukherjee uh, has time and again said that she is not an Indian writer who is influenced by the Indians writing in English. Rather, she is an American writer in the North American tradition of writing, and that is why she writes in North American English. So, we find that it happening in this novel as well. The prose is lyrical and vivid, often poetic in its evocation of place and emotion. She uses motifs like river, travel, and vision, and to underscore Jasmine's transformation from India to America and to the farthest America. And so it turns out to be a landmark novel in South Asian American literature, it complicates the narrative of assimilation by showing how identity is never static. And Mukherjee positions her protagonist not as someone who simply adapts, but as someone who transforms the world around her by transforming herself. It's not that she surrenders herself to either of her American counterparts, rather, she alters their sensibility. And as he says that she has taken the Holy Trinity from Bud, and in exchange has given him her own Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. So, and not only that, she also transforms their taste bud by mixing matar paneer and pork, a strange kind of concoction, but nonetheless, it talks about the hybridization of her own effort. And so, when we look at diasporic elements in this novel, we find that migration and loss of home are and homeland, they are prominently discussed, but then with a difference in the sense the loss of home is also finding a new home, or rather we can say that alongside many of the critics of diaspora, Bharati Mukherjee also believes that there is no a static sense of home. Home is where you are, and that is why Jasmine continues to have several homes in several places and is still looking for a new home in a new place. So hybridity and reinvention are very much embedded in this text, as the identity, diasporic identity that has been projected is fluid rather than static. And with each new identity, we find Jasmine provides a response to context, showing how diaspora forces individuals to adapt, fragment, and evolve. And not only Jasmine, but there are other characters in the novel as well, like Do, with whom she feels lot of affinity with. He is also somebody who is adaptable, a fast learner, and adapting fast to the American lifestyle. So, they are the likes who have potential to survive in America. All others will not survive. This is what Bharati Mukherjee wants to say. Trauma and survival in the diaspora always, is fraught with violence, exploitation, and unspeakable traumatic experience. We find such incidents taking place on a regular basis. As Jasmine is raped, she kills her attacker, and she is constantly vulnerable to cultural misunderstandings and resilience. If we look at diaspora as a post-colonial novel, we will critique both the limitations of the homeland, like patriarchy, superstition, and poverty, and the false promises of the hostland, America, where there is a subtle prevalence of racism, cultural erasure, and commodification. So, Jasmine therefore inhabits a third space, a concept from Homi Bhabha, where diasporic identities are formed not by full assimilation or nostalgia, but by creative negotiation and hybridity. We find that she does not completely assimilate in American culture, and but at the same time she carves a place where her Indian experience, her being Indian, her sensibility, her sense of dutifulness, her sense of caring people, that makes her unique. The mother of Bud Ripplemeyer has a special liking to her because she finds her different from her American Bahu, that is Karin, who is not as caring and compassionate to Mother Ripplemeyer as Jasmine happens to be. And this is possible only because she comes from a world where there's people, the older people are respected and venerated. So in conclusion, we can say that she is living in her own space, a third space, where she is trying to bridge the gap between her old world and the new world, and is not shutting on the doors onto her for her future progress. And so, in conclusion, we can say that in Jasmine, diaspora is not a simple condition of being away from home, it is a dynamic process of loss, reinvention, and cultural negotiation. Mukherjee challenges the static notions of identity and belonging, offering instead a portrayal of diaspora as a fluid, multi layered journey of becoming. So, through Jasmine, she illustrates that diasporic identity is not about returning to roots or assimilating completely, but about redefining the self across borders, often painfully but always with possibility. So, friends, this is all about Jasmine. In the next class, we will talk about another novel by Bharati Mukherjee, The Desirable Daughters. And till then, it's time to say thank you to you for your kind attention and company. So, look forward to you meeting in the next class. Thank you very much.